The DLC for Doom the Dark Ages can easily bring back the Crucible. No, I'm not talking about this one, I'm talking about this one. The world of Doom is ever expanding. From the series' grand reboot back in 2016, to the Dark Ages prequel story and its upcoming DLC, the overall universe of Doom continues to reach new depths. There is so much lore to dive into now, that there are far more questions than there are answers. And with an extensive amount of lore, some ideas are left unanswered. While the mystery is a large factor in what makes a narrative so exciting, it's still satisfying to solve and answer some of the bigger questions that have been built upon. If you were to be asked what the most mysterious and ambiguous aspect of the world of Doom is, a few things might come to mind. But of those ideas, the Demonic Crucible is near the top of that list. First introduced in Doom 2016, the Crucible is an unholy weapon of hidden origins with a dark, mostly unknown purpose. It was used by the Doom Slayer to fulfill his goal of shutting down the Hell Portal on Mars. The story originally insisted that the Argent energy-infused sword was one of a kind, but the Slayer's Crucible, its incorrupt counterpart used to stop Titans, was introduced in Doom Eternal, changing everything we thought we knew of the original artifact. While it seems like the Demonic Crucible's origin and purpose have been mostly left open to the player's interpretation, there are just too many pieces of this puzzle that are missing. The Demonic Blade did return in Eternal, but it was sidelined, as little to no depth or closure was provided, which came as a surprise. Although the dark future that the Crucible will tell is a question of its own, its mysterious past holds players back from predicting further. Sure, there were some broad ideas, but that didn't explain anything. All the suckers for Doom lore have been attempting to draw connections across the entire series for years, but to no avail. It seems like this plot point went unfinished and eventually became forgotten. Or was it? With the DLC for Doom the Dark Ages on the way, this idea can easily be revisited at last. As the concept of a large-scale Doom DLC suggests, a new weapon is likely on the horizon, and with the new extended lore implications that the Dark Ages provides to the franchise, perhaps new truths have surfaced. The Crucible may have a new understanding and hold a far richer, extensive history than it originally seemed. So, in today's video, I'm going to dive into the Demonic Crucible, and how we might finally wield this long-desired weapon. After attempting to connect the dots on its hidden past, using several key factors, including the more obscure and unexplored ones, I pieced together an idea that could near perfectly tie it into the overarching story that the Dark Ages presents, allowing players to finally gain the closure they've been asking for. I just want to remind everyone, this is pure speculation and theory. I am only drawing from pre-existing lore observations, and am hypothesizing based on them. This video will be approaching the story implementation of the Crucible, rather than the gameplay side of things. This is a long one, and it's all about the Crucible, but bear with me. Some of this stuff gets pretty deep. But anyways, let's have fun and speculate. Before I dive into how I predict the Crucible may return in the DLC, we must first ask the question, why? Why the Crucible? Why would we be given the opportunity to wield it? There are many aspects of the story across the series, including the latest installment, that suggest a return, but lore aside, why would it return now, if at all? With the way it's been hinted at, and with the pattern of previous Doom games in their DLC, it is fair to assume that Doom's DLC will likely throw a new weapon our way. It's expected for a DLC of such a scale as Doom's to not only provide new challenging and unique AI, but to also balance those new enemies with an additional toy to master. A very clever means of doing so is by adding not a new gun to experiment and have fun with, but instead a tool with a purpose, one tightly integrated in the overall flow of combat. A strong way to execute that could be through a melee weapon. In Dark Ages, the use of melee attacks and combos is vital to the entire combat system, with each option having their own unique purposes. The Dark Ages is a medieval game, so it's expected that melee is prioritized. That being said, when you think of medieval fantasy, the things that come to your mind are dragons, castles, chainmail armor, helmets, shields, and swords. In this game, that medieval vision comes to life. We have gauntleted fists, a spiked mace, an iron flail, and a shield, many of the staples of that world. However, the only thing left to complete that medieval package is a sword. It seems to be what many players want. While a new, original sword would be welcomed, implementing the Crucible would make our use of a sword unique to the Doom brand specifically. Aside from the lore implications that the Dark Ages may present regarding it, the Crucible's gameplay involvement would make sense for a game of this style. Melee is important. One thing to briefly add here, in a previous livestream, Hugo Martin mentioned the broad idea of a Doom game with a fast slicing weapon as a huge combat mechanic. So we can only piece together what that may imply, but that's for another time. It might seem to challenge the lore to bring in the Demonic Crucible, so why not the Slayer's Crucible? A medieval Doom appears to be the most logical instance to see the Doom Slayer return, with this iconic sword that he initially used during his early days of the Night Sentinels. However, at this point in the timeline, the Slayer's Crucible has already been exerted and is no longer in the Marine's possession. It is still embedded in the chest of the Dreadnought Titan that attacked Terrace Nabat. Although the Slayer's initial use of the weapon with the Sentinels was short-lived, it still served a great purpose, as it was what allowed him to save the city. He left his Crucible there because, if removed, the Titan would rise again. He returned eons later in Eternal to retrieve it, as the blade was still piercing the Titan. Early concept art for Dark Ages suggests that maybe id Software was playing with the idea of Doomguy repowering the Slayer's blade or using an additional one, but that would have likely disturbed the overall lore. These Crucibles seem to be pretty few of a kind. So, in regards to using the Crucible, the Slayer's Crucible is rolled out of the equation, leaving us with the Demonic Crucible. While the demonic prophecy from 2016 points towards a catastrophic event post-Doom Eternal, other factors in the story suggest that the Demonic Crucible holds tales from a far earlier point in the timeline. The ancient artifact could also be explored in the Dark Age era. To speculate how it could be implemented in the story, hopefully even in the DLC, it is important to first analyze the Slayer's possible relation to the Crucible. It was never stated that the Doomslayer used the Demonic Crucible, as he had his own. It is even heavily theorized that this was initially the Dark Lord's blade, as seen in Ancient Gods, before it became entirely corrupted by Hell's influence. It is not the Doomslayer's. But there is a rich backstory to understand through its involvement in Doom 2016, as well as Argenta history. In 2016, long after becoming a lost artifact of immense power, the Slayer obtains the Crucible only to shut down the well and close the Hell Portal. That's the notion the story seems to give following the release of Eternal and its DLCs. But did we forget that original interpretation that 2016 pushed? Put yourself in the mindset of a player coming fresh from Doom 2016 with no further knowledge. In that game, we learned of an ancient artifact that had the power to close the well. In doing so, will shut down the portal on Mars, and rid Hell and Earth of the flow of Argent energy for good. It was never revealed that it was actually an Argent energy charged sword until the climax. Its main purpose for the Slayer and Hayden was pretty front and center to the story, while the details regarding its power remained a mystery. Throughout the game, however, we are given subtle hints that it held a dark history and was actually once ours. Many players assumed it was once wielded by the Doomslayer during his time with the Night Sentinels in their war against Hell, or even used in Hell following the infamous betrayal. While it was never stated directly in the narrative, the idea was supported by a few subtle key moments. On the mission briefing screens throughout the campaign, there is always a short summary of the events in the story. A few of these briefings regarding the Crucible tell us to retrieve what is ours, and that we reclaim the Crucible. The term reclaim implies that one is taking back what was once theirs. On top of that, the Slayer Testaments speak of a sword used by the Slayer. This sword may have been a metaphor, or something else entirely, but its acknowledgement is important to take into account. The most notable key moments, however, are the recurring appearances of the Slayer symbol during specific moments. During the mission, the Necropolis, before you engage with the Hellguards protecting the Crucible, the mark of the Slayer is shown to be engraved on the gates just before the arena. This was back at a time in the story's development when that symbol was simply meant to refer to the Slayer and the warning to Hell, not the Dark Lord nor the mark of the Primeval. The Helix Stone is even what the Slayer used to discover the location of the Crucible. The stone bore the mark of the Slayer and contained critical information regarding Argent energy, the Slayer's sarcophagus and its location, and even the location of the Crucible. These ideas give the player the impression that this demonic artifact was once wielded by the Slayer. This is what sparked the player's desire to use it in the next story. However, the idea that the Demonic Crucible seemed tied to the Slayer's past became more or less forgotten once it was explained in Eternal that he instead had a crucible of his own. As players' expectations were subverted, and perhaps as a retcon, the Marine was given a Slayer's Crucible, and it was the weapon that he used with the Night Sentinels against the Legions of Hell, not its demonic equivalent. So at that point, most players assumed the Demonic Crucible instead had other purposes in the story, and that the weapon wasn't related to the Slayer directly. Or was it? Well, you can play it off as such, but that would still leave one huge aspect unanswered, one that challenges that entire idea. What about these? There is an abundance of Demonic Crucible imagery throughout Argent Denor. The Slayer's Blade was a sacred weapon of the Sentinel Society, but this isn't that one. One of the most unexplained aspects of the Demonic Crucible is its relation to the Sentinels. There is only one Demonic Crucible after all, and it is presumed to have been a large part of Argenta history. This is mainly due to the recurring appearance of Crucible imagery through various statues and murals. Maybe they can be explained as placeholders and set pieces used for Argenta landscapes, or maybe there is more to discover about the Crucible through the Sentinels. Well, this imagery has been largely speculated upon since their debut. These were first depicted in the multiplayer maps of 2016, specifically the DLCs. Just a few short months following the release of 2016, the DLCs began their releases. In those maps, many concepts and early story beats of Doom Eternal were first debuted, teased. There is heavy foreshadowing to its following project, but of these hints was our first true look at Argenta. In these maps, including select hell maps, we are given our first glimpse at the Makers, the Sentinel cities, and even a further look at the Crucible. This is where these architectural art pieces and mural designs were first showcased. In Eternal, they were further used in every single Argenta mission. The inclusion of these assets further indicates that the Slayer did in fact use this Demonic Crucible. After Eternal's release, because of the addition of the Slayer's Crucible, it was thought that maybe this was just an early story idea before the lore fully developed, and could have simply been reused assets. However, these designs are so abundant and not so obscure at times that their continued use can't be a simple mistake. They are easy to pass by on the path of the objective. Several of these pieces are consistent throughout the rest of the series, including the Dark Ages, so the architecture depicted here can't be the result of mere concept art and set-piece reuse. id Software is known for their deep environmental storytelling, and have always been quite careful and clever with what they tease or imply. id loves foreshadowing, as shown with the Dark Lord story arc, the buildup of Samuel's true identity, the tease of the Atlands, and the origin of the Wraiths. So these set pieces are not lore inconsistencies. They are a part of another important story piece that is being built up. Their inclusion doesn't necessarily have to imply that the Slayer used the Demonic Crucible, but there is undoubtedly an implication that the Demonic Crucible had a heavy impact on Argenta culture. The Sentinels have always etched major parts of their history into their architecture, as shown through the Wraiths, the Makers, and the Slayer. But why would the Crucible be a part of that? It is a dark weapon of their known enemy. Did the knowledge of the Crucible's existence surface after the arrival of the Doom Marine? Maybe. But what if it arose before then? There are two possibilities here. One where the Crucible became associated with Sentinel history after the discovery of Hell and the Slayer, and the other, instead, before then? Well, in the Dark Ages, a story taking place very early on in the Slayer's time with the Sentinels, the Crucible is shown to already be tied to Argenta history, as it is present here as well. So, potentially predating the arrival of the Slayer, this artifact has been a part of a legend, spanning across Sentinel history. Though to an extent unknown, an ancient prophecy undoubtedly influenced their civilization. The knowledge of its existence may have emerged from whispers across realms, the idea of a weapon of immense strength that would provide worlds with power and prosperity. On specific Crucible imagery, the blade is shown in resemblance to the biblical flaming sword. It is also associated with an illustration resembling the Tree of Life. Both of these concepts are of biblical proportions, possibly being the in-universe interpretations of both. Certain Maker imagery even depicts angelic beings holding the Demonic Crucible, which is ironic, as we all know the artifact is actually tied to Hell. Did the Sentinel prophecy originate from Hell, spread through lies and manipulations across the cosmos? If this were the case, the denizens of Argenta would have been oblivious to the Crucible's dark truths. However, if the knowledge of the Crucible's existence instead emerged after the arrival of the demons and the Slayer, then maybe the Crucible was so impactful on the Argenta because, similar to everything else showcased in their culture, it saved them. This can be indicated by the inclusion of the Slayer's mark that is present on the same murals. They may have been reluctant to put faith in a weapon derived from their enemy, but being used by their savior, the Demonic Crucible granted the Sentinels further prosperity during a time of need. It is unclear about what point in time the Crucible first became known, but regardless, if this is the prophecy, if this explains the importance of the Crucible to the Argenta, then this would tie into that original idea, back in the days of 2016's release, that theorized the Doomslayer did in fact wield the Crucible at a time. The Dark Ages DLC, potentially taking place in this prophesized era, could show how the Slayer first discovered and utilized the Demonic Crucible during the prolonged war against Hell and further beyond. However, the involvement of this weapon in the story would come with other implications. The Doomslayer has proven himself to not be in need of any strength beyond what is within, so why would he particularly need a weapon of such magnitude if he has already led the Sentinels to victory without it? Why would he even need to obtain it, and how would its discovery unfold? The Crucible may hold a far more intense power, along with a far greater importance to Hell. Was the artifact so safely and discreetly secured in Hell for a greater reason? Maybe it reveals a greater vulnerability to the realm it's tied to, one that would devastate its home world if it were to fall into the wrong hands. The Dark Ages concluded with the Slayer returning to Hell to focus on his next target, setting up yet another tale, another conquest against Hell. It is heavily speculated that the DLC of Dark Ages will revolve around the Doomslayer hunting down the High Council of Hell, another plot point long foreshadowed, even teased by the game's director. This council is presumably comprised of a group known as the Order of the Six. The archdemons of this order are descendants of the Unholy bloodlines, born from the primordial Black Heart, and they oversee Hell following the loss of the Dark Lord. Demons of this rank are immortal. However, if mere Hell Priests hold a vulnerability to sever their protection, then so does the High Council. If the Slayer is hunting these elder demon gods down, he would likely need something of great power to do so, something far greater than blue medallions, or the destruction of unholy guardians. This is where the Demonic Crucible falls into place. It is likely that this was formerly the Dark Lord's Crucible. Davoth is a key component in uncovering the truth of the demonic artifact, because in Ancient Gods 1, he had a crucible, one identical to the Slayer's Sentinel weapon, when the Father struck him down. Hell took this artifact, one able to be wielded only by an entity of such power, and it likely became corrupted by the horrors of Hell, warping its appearance and power. Since the Doomslayer has a crucible, it would make sense for his opposite, another Primeval, to have one too. This is further backed up by the fact that perhaps this mark right outside of the Crucible's chamber wasn't meant to signify that this was the Slayer's, but rather that it was the Dark Lord's, as they share that mark. With this pinpointed as the Dark Lord's Crucible, originating from this one, a huge question is raised. Why would Davoth have a Sentinel weapon, when known to be powered only by Wraith energy? The Sentinels didn't rise until an incalculable amount of time later, and the weapon is made out to be of their heritage, as it was a sacred weapon of their society. Do these crucibles have a relation to one another? Well, it wasn't necessarily ever a Sentinel weapon. Very little was ever known about it. However, it is known in Sentinel history that only a true warrior king could utilize the crucible, and that it was never wielded before. When the Slayer emerged from the divinity machine, he acquired the crucible and destroyed the Dreadnought Titan. But why, and how, was this weapon given to him so quickly following his enhancement? It even already bore his iconic mark, the mark within the machine. This weapon could have been given to the Slayer by someone other than the Sentinels. The Seraphim? What if this was a weapon of celestial origin? One of Maker design? Was it Hell's, as their technology was the foundation of Urdax? Or is it something else? The Slayer's sword holds a demonic origin. One important, overlooked detail tells a lot. The texts and sigils flowing throughout the blade of the Slayer's Sentinel Crucible are also present in its demonic counterpart, and this is no mistake. This demonic text is the language of Hell, and it is seen a lot, so this was clearly not intended to be a reused asset that was meant to be overlooked. The Slayer's Crucible does not use Hell energy. I know what you're thinking. Argent energy is known to be red, but it is explicitly stated that the Crucible conducts Wraith fire. This language is seen regardless of the color. It's unknown why, but for the sake of the theory, let's say that the Slayer's blade uses Sentinel energy. So why is this demonic scripture present in both swords? Well, I'll come back to this later. The Demonic Crucible conducts an incalculable amount of Hell energy and eventually Argent, an extension of that same essence, one created by and even connected to the Dark Lord himself. So perhaps it can be used as a vulnerability against Hell, which is why it is so heavily locked up. This may not be a weakness to Hell as a whole, but specifically the ones that share a tie to the Dark Lord, the descendants of the primordial Black Heart, the High Council. What if the Demonic Crucible is the only thing capable of killing or stopping those that share ties to its power? Think about it. These demons are immortal. Some sort of action will have to be taken in order to render them vulnerable. Maybe a weapon would do so, something somehow linked to a power they both have, if not above it. This would near perfectly tie into how and why the Slayer initially obtained it, as foreshadowed in both 2016 and Sentinel history. The Slayer would rightfully seek to end the High Council, as they are currently at the top of the hierarchy of Hell. At this state, they are the Slayer's greatest rival, as his conflict and knowledge of the Dark Lord is unfamiliar to him. The unholy artifact of immense power is his only means of stopping them. In order to claim his vengeance against Hell, the Doomslayer would take this blade and strike down the ones he holds responsible for everything he'd lost. After he achieves his goal, the Doomslayer will hold this weapon for a prolonged period of time before it is taken from him. Eventually, it would be sealed away and protected by the most ferocious guardians of the demonic realm. The symbol was burned upon it, as the temple would now harbor the weapon of their former ruler. The demons must never let the Slayer gain control of it again, but eventually, he would reclaim what he lost. Although undergoing a long period of stasis, stripped from its power after being used on the High Council, the Slayer would soon recharge it with the souls of the Wraiths to shut down the flow from Argenta. finally providing closure to the people he'd lost. While it would be great to connect the Crucible to the story in this way, there may be one important part of the picture missing, an important aspect of the Dark Ages that will undoubtedly have some involvement in the DLC. A huge theme of the Dark Ages is the Cosmic Realm. The unholy union between the realms is important to the identity of this prequel story. While Hell is the main threat, the Cosmic Realm, along with its eldritch influence on the demons, is almost certain to return. However, if the focus on the story is the Slayer hunting down and destroying Hell's leaders in some manner, how would the Cosmic Realm be relevant to the story? It is certain that the Slayer will return to Hell in the DLC, as the game's ending and official teases suggest. So if Hell is the focus, and if it is a necessity to acquire some sort of weapon to kill Hell's leaders, as I've been speculating, then how would the Cosmic Realm fit into that equation? Maybe there's more to the Crucible and the power it holds than originally thought. Because of the existence of the Cosmic Realm, everything changes. The newly explained origin of the Wraiths may seem like no big deal, but once you consider the potential ties the Wraiths and their energy hold to the Crucible, and further Davoth's ownership of one, everything becomes complicated. In the beginning, Davoth, the creator of the known universe and a primeval, fell through the void. He had power so immense and unknown that countless worlds sprung forward where he roamed. However, the mysterious voice at the end of Eternal suggests that there is a high power outside of Urdak and even Hell, possibly even beyond them. Could this be the one who creates primevals? Could this be tied to the Elemental Wraiths or the World Spear? Since the release of the Dark Ages, it has been long theorized that the Cosmic Realm is that void, as it is sometimes referred to as such by name. The relationship between the World Spear, the Wraiths, and the Cosmic Realm was revealed, visualized through the Cyclopean environments. These structures may even hold resemblances to Jakad, Davoth's realm, which became Hell. If Davoth can be traced back to this world, if the Cosmic Realm wasn't a creation of his, then his power may find ties to the Wraiths to some extent. Let's get back to what I said earlier about these texts. Hang on real quick, this might get confusing. So, remember when I asked why the Dark Lord of Hell would have a weapon that was known to contain Wraith energy? This would explain how he had a crucible, one identical to the Slayer's, which surges with the highest extent of Wraith fire, not Hell energy. The Slayer's blade was thought to be related to Argenta in the Wraiths, but perhaps it's linked to what primevals are as a whole. This could explain why the Crucible already had this mark and was quickly presented to him following his blessing from the Seraphim. It was held onto by the Makers. This would also explain why both energy swords have texts and symbols of the same language, Hell's language. Before the Demonic Crucible surged with Argent energy, directly extracted from the Wraiths, it likely ran on Hell energy, and as I said, the Slayer's Crucible ran on Wraith energy. It's confusing because Hell and Argent energy are known to be red, while Wraith is typically blue. But the Slayer's blade isn't said to contain Argent. The Slayer's Crucible is also not the only energy weapon to conduct Wraith fire. Valen's Sentinel Hammer, as well as others, are also fueled by Wraith energy. Red or blue, the Sentinel weapons have this same demonic scripture that is seen throughout Hell. You could argue that this is due to the Makers and the Priests' usage of Hell energy, but this was at a time before the power sources were fused together, before the creation of Argent. I really don't have an explanation for the color inconsistencies. If this is just a plot hole, then throw this little part out. But it's still important to note, considering Davoth also had one. So like I said, for the sake of the theory, let's assume that this is Wraith energy here. But anyways, that being said, what could this mean? Because of the Hell texts on the different energies of both swords, the origin of the power must have some connection to the Wraiths, which implies even more. The connections shared among these higher realms, as well as the Crucible's possible origins, raise the idea that the Demonic Crucible may be a weapon connecting all realms together, and why it is prophesied to return in the future to corrupt all dimensions. Further similarities between realms can be drawn. Just look at Urdak. Urdak was formed as an extension to Jakad, to aid Davoth. Created by the Dark Lord, Urdak was not unlike his own world before it became somewhat of an opposite. The beings created by him are naturally very cosmic. The true nature of Urdak and the Makers is revealed when they undergo the transfiguration process. Instead of dying, their cosmic appearance progresses, and they warp into Cthulhu-like tentacle monsters, even emphasized by Hugo Martin. Without the essence of the Father, or even Argent energy, they mutate into beings that resemble the eldritch abominations found in the void. The eyes and the tentacles allude to a relation to the cosmic realm, and that is fairly direct. Again, Davoth is the one who created this race, so the concept of the Transfiguration speaks a lot about the untold truths of the Makers and the connections Urdak, and furthermore Hell, may have to something more. The eyes and the tentacles can't be ruled as a coincidence. There is much to add regarding the hierarchy of realms and their relations to one another, but it's important to take these main connections into account when pinpointing where the Crucible, along with its power, can be traced back to. So getting back to the Crucible, if Davoth really fell from this place, if this proves the Dark Lord's initial ties to the Cosmic Realm, then maybe it would allow for a new understanding of where the Crucible originated. A deal was struck between the Cosmic Realm and Hell, and that may be a key factor in understanding the power of the Crucible, and how it could return in another prequel story. id Software has stated several times that they have been flirting with and teasing the inclusion of the Cosmic Realm for quite some time. Aside from the similarities with the makers, the titanic beasts and abominations from the Void have been right in front of us all along. Many of these creatures have been confirmed to be directly from that world. The cosmic influence has been present for eons, but where all have we seen it so far? What can we apply this to when uncovering the true nature of the Demonic Crucible? When I explained there is an abundance of Cyclopean architecture across the Void, I meant it. There are green eyes everywhere, staring through the unfathomable depths of reality, inducing endless dread and insanity to those who meet their gazes. The purpose and true meaning of these eyes are unknown. This influence reached a depth beyond their own world, other than the World Sphere, as Hell allowed their influence and dread to expand beyond. This means that the Cosmic Realm can be traced to other places that we've already seen. So because of this alliance with the Dark Realm, the forces of the Void could have retrieved the demonic relic, manipulating it with their dark magic. The Crucible has a green eye on the hilt, clear as day, not unlike the one seen throughout the Void. You can tell it's an eye, and not something else, due to its shape, but it becomes even more obvious when you observe its concept art, as it shows other designs where the eye is even given a pupil. As shown in Eternal back in the art complex, this green orb acts as a power source. When the blade is in stasis, the eye turns green, and then red when active, when it would eventually surge with Argent energy. Not only the Crucible itself, but Doom 2016 has one or two more accounts of a similar green eye and cosmic design. Most notable of these are the creatures controlling the Hellguards, the Ebon Leeches. These parasites are small tentacle entities. Seem familiar? The entities surge with a green energy force of enormous strength. While the connections among these designs may not hold validity, they are still notable. Could this be a result of cosmic influence? The parasites are the ones protecting the Crucible from the Slayer or anyone else. So is it coincidental that they have some cosmic resemblance as well as the artifact? Or do they really share something more? Hell's known alliance with the Cosmic Realm would let these similarities make all the more sense. Again, the cosmic appearance of the Crucible may seem a bit far-fetched, as single-eyed or tentacle entities don't always indicate a cosmic presence. A big connection could be drawn from this, but it's unlikely that the Cosmic Realm was in mind during development of 2016. However, like I said, it's being pushed that it's been around this entire time. On top of that, the Void as a whole is still without a doubt going to be used to connect some dots in the overall story, as seen with the Wraiths. id Software truly took a risk with introducing the Cosmic Realm to the series, and they really went to engage it with the world of Doom, making it much more important to the universe rather than a one-and-done story feature. The realm's union with Hell is cemented into the theme of the Dark Ages. The Void will return. There are many ways to bring back the Realm of Chaos as a main threat, but tying the Crucible in as the Slayer's incentive would give us an exciting reason to return to the Void, tear through new cosmic abominations, and blast even more amazing Cosmic Realm music. Connecting the Cosmic Realm to the Crucible in this way would fit well with the story in my opinion, as the Crucible has been empowered and reformed throughout time. The Eldritch influence could have found its way to the Crucible. It's uncertain as to how exactly the Crucible ended up in the Void's possession, but the Doomslayer acquiring it in this DLC somehow would explain how he ends up with it and why it's a part of Argenta history. Maybe Ulsamir will play into the equation, or maybe something else tries to conceal it from him, but the Slayer would eventually find it. So before I explain my final theory, let's recap. Since a new weapon is likely to join the roster in the DLC for the Dark Ages, and since the gameplay heavily relies on melee options, a sword has an opportunity to be featured. The Demonic Crucible has an obvious history with the Slayer and the Argenta that we are unsure about that needs to be explored. The Lost Blade belonged to the Dark Lord, and there are various potential ties they both have to the Void. But because the DLC may feature the Slayer hunting down the High Council, and because the Cosmic Realm has to return, the DLC may at last implement the Demonic Crucible to do so. In order to enact his revenge against the Council, the Doomslayer seeks an ancient prophesized artifact, one of unholy capacities. The weapon has been long rumored about, and feared by the Argenta, as it would be revealed to have ties with Hell, their greatest threat. However, the Argenta realize that this is their only means to prevail in their prolonged war against the demonic horde. The Doom Marine sets off on an expedition to find the artifact. He would travel to the Cosmic Realm once again to obtain a tool that reveals a weakness of the ones he seeks to end, as it is the only thing capable of incapacitating them, much like the Hell Priest's blue medallions. The Slayer eventually meets his goal and wields the blade of his enemy, a powerful relic of the demon's past. It is a weapon corrupted by the dark influence of Hell, one that would soon surge with the purest form of Argent energy. The Crucible would allow him to achieve his goal. It became embedded into Sentinel history, much like its counterpart. Now exerted and stripped of most of its power, it would eventually be reclaimed by Hell. There, it will be safeguarded away from the Slayer, to be kept on standby for the return of their leader, the Dark Lord. But before his resurrection, Davoth would be too late to retrieve his long-lost weapon of immense power, as it would already be taken by Samuel Hayden, Sammer, who may or may not have already used it for himself. But that's a theory for another day, the future of Doom. The Crucible may not be the largest weapon, but it is the single most powerful and devastating of them all. The weapon belongs only to a Primeval, one of the Slayers and Davoth's kind, or someone truly worthy of it, at least in its purest form. While this is all speculation, having the mysterious Crucible finally explained to some capacity will satisfy the nearly 10-year-long questions that were left unanswered. It will satisfy all players who want to see the long-awaited implementation of the Crucible as a proper melee weapon to ravage the legions of Hell in one of the most devastating ways possible. Thanks for watching. This was fun speculation crafted from knowledge from all Doom games across the board. While I didn't plan to solve the Crucible, as it's all detailed speculation, I think that the story that the Dark Ages tells, along with the expansion it had on the world of Doom, can push us towards new ideas to help us solve it. The connections between Davoth, Jakad, and the Void are better left for another video, but a semi-deep analysis was still necessary to uncover the potential untold history of the Demonic Crucible. It's best left for the DLC or another game to show us. I enjoy doing theories like this, so let's see how valid these ideas become after the release of the DLC. Please let me know what you think in the comments.